Hi friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and today's episode is sponsored by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. Also, you can use our code GenerationTech, one word, on their website if you want to save 10% on your next purchase. You could probably also create a website that polls Star Wars fans on which era they like the most, which is exactly what we're going to be talking about today. You see, as a Star Wars YouTuber, we try to cover as much of the franchise as possible from the very beginning to the end. But we've noticed for one reason or another, the prequel era videos, especially ones focused on the Clone Wars period, seem to do the best. Today we're going to do a deep dive and try to figure out why Star Wars fans seem to gravitate towards this era of the galaxy and why it's so well received. We'll also take a look at the original trilogy and sequel trilogy and try to gauge what fan perception is about these periods in the franchise. Don't forget to stay until the end of this video because we're going to put up a poll where you guys can vote on which period of Star Wars you like the best. I'm curious to see what your answers are. Quantcast, an AI-driven audience behavior research platform, did a study prior to The Force Awakens and found out that the average Star Wars fan was male and in between the ages of 18 and 44. They also like history, and their most common profession is IT or law, which is what I expected. Mostly young and middle-aged, interested in history, and probably pretty intelligent, if not nerdy. If we look at Generation Tech's channel statistics, it reflects that same truth. Now, what's important about this 18 to 44 demographic is that they were 2 to 28 years old when The Phantom Menace came out, and by the time The Revenge of the Sith came out, those same fans were 8 to 34 years old. This means the majority of Star Wars fans today were either children, teens, or at least young adults when the prequels came out. This means they were the target audience for Lucasfilm. And just like the older fans who became adults before the prequels and grew up with the original trilogy, your first Star Wars film in theaters is a special experience, one that gets you attached to the franchise. And it's important to be exposed to Star Wars as a child because you're less sophisticated as a consumer and less jaded about what you see. If The Phantom Menace was the first sci-fi fantasy film you've ever seen, it most likely will make a huge impact on your life. And if you were young like me during that time, the clunky dialogue and Jar Jar Binks didn't really make you all that angry. That was more of the older fans who had expectations and already had opinions on how they wanted to see the franchise develop. But the greatest success of the prequels was not just the film, but also a huge variety of video games, comic books, novels, and 2 awesome cartoon TV shows. These properties kept fans engaged in between movies, and they were all targeted specifically at boys and young men. You had action strategy games like Empire at War, shooters like the Republic Commando series, and Battlefront. You also had amazing RPGs like KOTOR, which expanded into the Old Republic era. Then you had excellent novels like Darth Plagueis, which explained the political intricacies behind the Clone Wars and actually made the prequel films far more interesting. There's also the Republic Commando series, which gave a voice to the clones and allowed viewers to understand what life was like for them. You also had the Thrawn series by Timothy Zahn, which expanded what happened after the death of the Emperor. And then there's the New Jedi Order series, which further expanded the story of Star Wars into the future. When I was growing up, Star Wars was so large that it was almost like a genre of its own. You had Star Wars zombie stories, horror stories, war dramas, romance, and everything else in between. But there was always a central theme during this period of time. Although we had stories during the Old Republic and also after the original trilogy, the main focus was always on the Clone Wars. And unlike the Galactic Civil War, the Clone Wars was between 2 evenly matched factions, and it was epic in proportion. And the 2 recurring themes that we saw again and again were war and politics. And again, if we look at the current demographics of Star Wars fans, which are 18 to 44 males who like history, well, it's all starting to make sense. Despite how chaotic the Star Wars lore was becoming and the lack of focus from Lucasfilm, they did know what the fans wanted. Then you have the original trilogy. It'll always be regarded as sacred by most Star Wars fans, but in many ways it was always frozen in time for those of us who weren't alive to see it in theater. They're more gospel than living art. That's not to say they aren't popular. You can't really be a true Star Wars fan without seeing these films. But again, fandom is oftentimes established when you are still in your developmental stage and absorbing information. As adults, you already know what you want and you're not as open to new things. And now most of these original trilogy fans that grew up with those movies are becoming older and they're outnumbered by the younger fans. The sequel trilogy has started out on shaky ground. While the first film was generally well received by critics and fans alike, The Last Jedi was almost universally panned by the core Star Wars community. A lot of this has to do with how Disney approached the film and also how the film industry has changed in the last 20 years. First, Disney bought the Star Wars franchise for $4 billion. This is a crazy amount of money for what essentially is a fictional franchise. It does make sense though, because very few franchises rival Star Wars in size and has the same type of loyal and dedicated fans. But whenever that much money is involved in a transaction, people start getting rational. Really rational, which sometimes is actually a bad thing. Because while being rational and predictable is great when you're handling explosives or piloting a passenger airline, but it's kind of a bad thing when it comes to film because you get rid of creativity and risk-taking and you replace that with what's safe and with what you know already will work. And that's kind of the problem with the entire film industry. I don't know if you've noticed, but in the last few decades, almost every movie is either based on a true story, exists within a franchise like Marvel, DC, or Harry Potter, or based on some book with an existing fan base. Movies have gotten crazy expensive, and when you have a crazy expensive budget, you'll need certain assurances that you'll recoup those investments. And that means a pre-existing audience that can guarantee you at least some return. That's why we hardly ever see new ideas in theaters, only sequels, prequels, and spin-offs. As a matter of fact, all the cool new scripts that would have been awesome one-off movies in the 80s or 90s are now all premium TV shows. Which I guess isn't a bad thing, at least they have somewhere to go, unlike the Ewoks when the Rebels dropped the second Death Star on top of their planet. Now, The Force Awakens was a perfect example of an extremely safe film that was almost guaranteed to make a ton of money. You have J.J. Abrams, who doesn't really stand out or is that unique of a director, but is a great collaborator and producer. The Force Awakens looked excellent and had amazing production value, and to JJ's credit, captured that wonderful feeling we all want to see when we watch a Star Wars film. But the script was so close to A New Hope, it almost felt like a rehash or a remake. But the film made $2 billion, making it the third highest growing film in history. Now, Disney was really happy about this, but they are a corporation and they're always looking to include more demographics into their audience. The opening night audience for Force Awakens was 67% male and 33% female. While that's not a terrible ratio for a sci-fi fantasy genre, Disney saw an opportunity to continue to grow their audience base. With The Last Jedi, the focus became getting more females, especially younger females, into the seats. They did this by adding two new characters, Rose Tico and Admiral Hondo. It helped increase female viewership up to 43%. The Last Jedi also scooped up a respectable $1.3 billion in box office sales. Now, the film had several very strong social messages inside of it, and that's okay because, film is a platform to discuss these type of issues. The problem is it also portrayed men, the main target demographic, in a really poor light, which was a stupid move. This is what created the controversy and a lot of generally nasty back and forth between fans and Disney. And believe it or not, the normally very calculated and professional Disney allows one of its creators, Rian Johnson, to insult the fans for not liking his film. I guess the Disney executives were emboldened by the success of these two films and they thought everything was okay, but it wasn't. You see, a Star Wars fan can be anyone who watches a Star Wars movie, but there's something very different between an individual who goes and sees the main films and individuals who will take the time, read all the novels, play the video games, and buy that merch. Primarily, that second fan is going to spend a lot more money than the more casual one. Although these core Star Wars fans are quite homogenous demographically, they are important and responsible for also bringing a huge amount of non-fans to see the movies. They're basically advertising Star Wars for free. A great example would be this channel. We get around 200,000 views per day, and that's all free. We don't get anything from Disney, although they should pay us. The Last Jedi pissed off fans so much that they decided to boycott the Solo Star Wars film, which was a film created specifically for hardcore fans and featured one of the most beloved characters in the franchise. And it flopped, and that should be worrying, especially because, as a film, the mechanics and the plot were, in my opinion, a lot better than The Last Jedi's. This means that most fans that will go see the big movies like Force Awakens and The Last Jedi most likely aren't hardcore enough to watch an origin story film. And it also means that hardcore Star Wars fans are really pissed off enough to not go see a new Star Wars film. Now, there's a way to not piss off Star Wars fans and also gain new fans. And that's not letting Rian Johnson direct another trilogy. No, but seriously, I do hope JJ is able to mend the relationship between Disney and its core Star Wars fans. Or else Star Wars will just be another very vanilla and bland franchise, which is kind of sad. I hope Disney realizes in today's day and age where we are literally overwhelmed with content, and excellent content at that, the loyalty and dedication that Star Wars fans have for their franchise should be treasured because you really don't see it anywhere else. Now, there's nothing wrong with pushing a social agenda in a film. That's what art is all about, but that message needs to at least be inclusive and maybe even a bit more positive. Thanks again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Squarespace is the go-to place for creating your personalized website or online store. Better yet, you don't need any experience in website building or design because they have an assortment of beautiful and modern templates for you to choose from that are easy to modify for your needs. And just in case, they have award-winning 24/7 customer service via live chat and email. Once you're done with your website, Squarespace also has a plethora of marketing tools to optimize traffic. But don't just listen to me talking about Squarespace. Visit their website, which we'll link in the comment section down below, and start a free trial. Also, if you do end up purchasing anything, don't forget to use the 10% discount code. Generation Tech, one word and written, like you're screaming it at someone. So I think the prequels are the most popular amongst fans right now, but let me see what you think. Tell us in the poll in the top right corner which era of Star Wars you like the best. And also, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, thanks for joining us today. If you're watching this, you are Generation Tech.